How's it going, man?
Oh, it's going.
I thought I'd just put the recording button on straight away. How's your day been today?
Oh, it's been pretty good.
Yeah?
Yeah, I have this notebook that I've sort of been working in all year. Just a spiral bound notebook, and I've just kind of been filling it up with different things, and that's kind of what I'm going to be drawing off of today.
Cool. Let me tell you something that happened today, though. You probably have your phobias. One of my phobias is wasps. And I woke up at 6 a.m. and went into my sitting room, and there was just a swarm of wasps in my room. And yeah, and there's a nest on my roof. So I'm like completely wired right now. I can hear them humming up there. I know what that humming is now.
Are they still in your room?
Oh no, they're not in my room.
But you can hear them though.
Yeah, I can hear them. They're
Yeah.
humming. It's like this really, really quiet, dim humming sound. Yeah. And it's like my worst fear. People always tell me stories of when they have nests, and it makes my skin crawl. And I have one now, and I feel so weird coming in and out of my house just knowing that it's there, up there on my roof. I'm full of adrenaline dump. So
I feel the same way, kind of, because we got to get into some dark stuff today. Not that that's what we want to focus on or anything, but definitely going to be part of it.
Oh yeah, we are.
Yeah, it'll be like a John Carpenter horror movie with a happy ending. On our last episode, we were fixing to enter the cave, the underworld cave, and slay the cannibal queen.
Have you seen the 13th
I saw the
Warrior?
movie.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
That was good.
The 13th Warrior, it stuck with me. It made a big impression. I hadn't seen that movie for a long time. And yet, when we were talking about the Fool and we were talking about the wild men and the catastrophic mindset, the 13th Warrior popped into my head. And the scenes where they're discussing these berserker cannibal hordes who would prey on villages and would use terror tactics such as mimicking catastrophic events, such as the dragon, the glowworm. And in the movie, they show this glowworm coming down from the hills very slowly. And you see them preparing for battle with these villagers, and they've helped them to train and to build up reinforcements. But there's this glowworm coming down along with the mist in the movie, in this scene. And they all think it's a dragon until Banderas, his character, he goes out into the distance and sees past the fog and sees that it's just a mass of torches moving as one, making it seem as if it's a dragon. And we could go on and on about the other tactics that they use. The bear claws, bear suits from the carcasses of these bears. Okay. You were saying we left off with the cannibal cult and we were slaying the queen. Well, let's go back to the beginning because there's a lot to talk about there. Okay, so there's a talk of demons and these Nordic warriors and their Arabic tag-along, who's an ambassador. They find out that these demons are ransacking these villages. The way that they talk about their sacred objects and the way they move and the way they dress, this demonic plague has come upon them. So they go to hunt whoever is their leader. But just before then, they realize that this is a group who has a female leader. They have a queen. They eventually follow some scouts back to where their lair is, and they go underground. So they go down into this cave and they hunt her. When they go down there, this group, they're like animals, and they're rolling around in this pit, and they almost seem to be like in this orgiastic pose. There's human bones everywhere. They've been feeding on the villagers. There's bear corpses everywhere, complete debauchery, complete loss of any humanity. So eventually they find the queen, and she has this snake wrapped around her neck. She's got a poisonous claw that she dips in this black poison. And the leader of the Nordic warriors, kills her, but he gets attacked by her, and he actually inevitably ends up getting killed by her. This is how dangerous she is. She has control over this whole cult, and they realize that this is the main weak point. But what happened to this group that caused them to be like this, where they were severed from the earth, severed from their integrity, that their integrities merge with this queen? And why does she become the most important thing to kill? Even though the strongest of their warriors leads the group into war, it's this queen that they have to kill. And it's also this queen that inevitably kills the Nordic hero, who kills off the leader of the men. So it's the queen who inevitably kills the hero. But what is this film saying here with the underground scenes? They hide in the day, they sleep during the day, they stay in the cave, which is also synonymous with the mother's womb. And they have a queen, just like a wasp's hive has a queen. Something that's being said in this movies is that with these groups that have been infected with this emotional plague, because they've been severed from the natural rhythms of the earth, because they've been severed from nature, they've become animalistic, deranged. You see this group of cave dwellers, and they're in oblivion. They've completely given up their selfhood to this cannibal cult. Yeah.
So Frank Herbert was aware of this as well. I've come to a new realization recently with Frank Herbert. I've always been fascinated with Frank Herbert ever since I started picking up his books, like over a decade ago. But I've recently realized how literal he actually is being. He's straight up just telling you like it is. Not just with Dune. And Dune talks about the Bene Gesserit, the witches.
Bene
Talks
Gesserit,
about
yeah.
the Fremen who live in the caves, why they have a mindset that they do, how their goddess, priestesses operate within the caves, what role they have. But not just with Dune. He's got other books as well. He's got Hellstrom's Hive, talking about these people who live underground. He's got Santaroga Barrier or Saratoga Barrier, forget how it's called, but this is talking about a valley called the Saratoga Valley, where they have caves in there, and these people have a whole different mindset. He's got a book called The Whipping Star,
Mm-hmm.
and it has a cave motif in there as well, but the follow-up book from that is called The Dasadi Experiment, and that has all sorts of shit about caves, but at the same time he's like in depth psychoanalyzing these people in the book, what they're up to, why they think the way they think, and why they are compelled to act the way they act based on survival, what they perceive, because it's like they've woven their own reality into a perception that, from a perceptual point of view, forces them to act the way they do. When an outsider's just looking at them like, "Are you fucking insane? Like, just cut it out." But to them, they've woven this reality around their own minds. It's retarded, is all it is. But it's a vastly complex way of being retarded.
Right. I just keep wanting to hit back on this, to nail it. Like the deeper meaning of the 13th warrior, the malefic matriarchal cults needing the queen to continue on, and they're lost if the queen is killed. They have no individuality. They're mimicking pack animals, and humans, when they act like animals, they're more debased than animals because animals don't have a choice about it, right? So they need the cave, they need the safety of the cave, they need the goddess, right? They need her caves and her underground chambers and her rivers, underground rivers, and needing the safety of her womb, needing her hive. Reminds me of the queen's death, like they paraded her body around the whole the whole of the British Isles for days, and then had a massive funeral, this massive outpouring of emotion, of love for her. The way the earth used to be before, I've heard that the earth is layered like an onion now because of it. And to get back to parts of the earth that were there before on the surface, you have to go underground. So you're needing to get to the hollow earth. You're needing to get through the layers of this onion. And when you're not, you're severed from it. This group of cannibals are docile and sleepy when they're underground, like they're recharging. That really came through in the movie as well. Getting lost in her labyrinth, right? Those myths of the labyrinth and getting lost and using Ariadne's thread to find the way out. But if you don't, you become one of these Dionysian lost souls trapped in the labyrinth forever. In the past, going in the cave, doing those sacred ceremonies, that was all to do with re-strengthening after the cataclysm, as you said once, using the earth as recuperation. When the surface was safe to inhabit it again, that must have taken some orientation as well, and thus some groups did adjust. We were all severed from it. There must have been a time, there's certain places around the world where whole cities are honeycombed, and there's deep tunnels that go underground for miles and miles and miles, and we just don't know where they go. What were we inhabiting those areas down there? Was a good portion of the human race down there for a long time? Did we become accustomed to it, and then coming back up to the surface, did we bring back this rot? Did we bring back this like just this illness with us because we had to adjust to that again? Just this idea of a collective as well, that we have to remain in a collective. There's so much we could talk about here, you know. Sorry, I've trailed on a little bit. You go on ahead.
We talked about Immanuel Velikovsky and his book Mankind and Amnesia. But he wrote that book because he was concerned about the possibility that mankind would steer itself towards a repetition of events which would mirror the planetary catastrophes which happened. So I'll read part of his book here. He says, quote, "Amnesia need not erase all memory. It may affect only certain areas of the past. Such cases are very numerous, and rarely is a neurotic personality free from some area of oblivion. Characteristically, the oblivion erases the most painful or terrifying reminiscences. Another of the pathological forms to which amnesia may lead is what is called mental scotoma. Psychological scotoma is an inability to observe certain situations, though they are obvious to other persons. A man may not see an evident fact or not recognize an obvious situation, though his intelligence and rationality should produce an immediate realization and proper reaction. Whereas the phenomena of total amnesia is rare, the observance of partial amnesia or psychological scotoma are daily experiences in psychiatry and psychoanalysis, and the leader himself most probably has succeeded in erasing the conscious memory some painful occurrences, greater or smaller, that his ego cannot face. Much of the maladjustment, failure and floundering, guilt feeling and self-punishment, or aggressiveness, hatred and hostility, pathological inclinations and sexual aberrations, criminal impulses and acts, suicide and murder, or detachment from reality and flight into madness can be traced by correctly applied analytical procedure to impressions erased from the conscious memory, traumatic occurrences, in short, to contents submerged. From the mind's dark recesses, they pilot the personality towards its bizarre behavior and not seldom toward a repetition of the traumatic experience. This repetition is sought in the form of a return to the scene of the first experience, or in a fixation on abnormal sexual objects, or in a selection of an occupation offering a regular substitute for an act repressed from the conscious memory. That's Immanuel Velikovsky, Mankind and Amnesia.
Exactly.
They didn't register it. It says that a man may not see an evident fact or not recognize an obvious situation. Sort of like get in the basement, before the tornado runs
right.
into you.
No, I'm aware of that quote, Caleb. And because I'm not finished with that movie, The 13th Warrior, because I really want to hear your opinion of it and the things that stuck out to you. But when you were talking about that quote just there, going back to that movie, what happens when this cannibal horde, this cave cult, when they attack the villagers nearby, the villagers think that the horde are demons, right? And they think that this horde, when they're coming down from the hill and the mist is gathering, they think that it's a dragon, but it's not a dragon. It's a catastrophic mindset. It goes into an irrational mode where it almost begins to mythologize reality, leave things out, and it takes a rational man to go out there and see that they bleed, see that they're using tactics, be made aware of their weaknesses and strategic weaknesses. So with catastrophe and the trauma, it strips people away of any rationale.
It can, yeah. And Velikovsky stated in his book that he intended the publication of his book to actually stir up and bring to consciousness those repressed memories in order to help mankind not steer itself towards a repetition of it. But the whole book was geared towards celestial events that were happening in the sky that mankind witnessed from ground level.
Well, I've also been taking a look at the novel Mankind and Amnesia, and I have a quote from Velikovsky as well. A probe touching a cell in the brain makes a forgotten memory vivid. So vivid that the person believes himself to be living in a situation that actually took place many years before. We have seen a person susceptible to hypnosis receive an oral order to be unable to see or to hear, or to move an arm and comply with the order. Is this just a pretense on the subject's part? But the same person receives an order to be like a rigid rod, and upon being placed between two chairs, head on one and heels on the edge of the other, he or she, even a slight woman in this cataleptic state, can support the weight of several persons. Whence comes this physical reserve, unavailable in the conscious life, to the person now in catalepsy? And how can an oral order, nothing but sound, mobilize this reserve? A person in hypnosis is given a suggestion to perform some act at a given time, possibly days after the hypnotic session, and to forget the command until time for its execution. Without being consciously aware of the suggestion and without a timepiece, the individual executes the command precisely on time. Is it then that a time measuring device is implanted in the human brain? What causes forgetting and remembering? Least of all does the hypnotist, be he a trained psychiatrist or an uneducated variety performer, know what makes hypnosis work. What are the physical and mental reserves that can be brought into action with the simplest of tools, a human word or gesture? The limits are suddenly so much wider that the capabilities used in daily life seem but one octave of a full keyboard. And those quotes that we just went into there, I think explain, or rather bring to mind, a lot of questions. How is a person hypnotized? How is a person able to be hypnotized? What in nature put that mechanism in a person where they can give up their freedom to someone else and that person can use them as a puppet? It's from here I want to go into one of the first cases of sorcery in Britain, the key to world history. It's the story of Moses. who coordinated his attack on Egypt in line with a volcanic eruption and celestial upheavals. They were saved by God. That's what they believed. And Deucalion was warned by a volcano that a flood was coming. Deucalion, who was also Noah. Noah's ancestor knew the magic of firearms as well. The trauma of this and the coupling of the savior complex around the timing of wars around cometary visitations is hardwired into us and can be dredged up any time a sorcerer of serious clout wishes. And this is what Commons Beaumont has to say about Abram, otherwise known as Abraham or the High Ram. The first reliable clue we possess to the early civilization of the Bronze Age may be traced with some certainty to the coming of Abraham, more properly Abram, son of the Ram, that is the spiritual son of the god Ammon or Hermes, the deified genius of magism or druidism, Abram becoming the archmagus or chief druid of the south. Sometime about 2160 BC, according to revised Bible chronology, and as stated by Josephus in his Antiquities of the Jews, the patriarch led a strongly armed following of Hebrews, Ibeas, from the ancient parent city of the of Chaldees, conducting them eventually to the territories named Canaan and Mizraim, where he built up a powerful state. Indications point to his success owing to the possession of firearms when such were very scarce and difficult to obtain. He was an initiate into the mysteries of the Cabriri gods and was himself described as the son of Terra. Now this also transcribes to the word Terra, a maker of magic instruments, and hence the word teraphim or terra images, no other, in fact, than fire weapons of war. Teraphim. In the investigation of the past, the more importance of firearms cannot be too strongly stressed. We are aware from modern histories of the effect of firearms when first used against savage races, the terror they caused, the savage's immediate subjection, and the tendency to deify the owner of such magic. And this is really important for what we're going to talk about today. In prehistoric times, when the possessors of such fire weapons employed them, the same results were obtained, and these pioneers cleverly made a profound mystery of such so that their victims believed that they were mighty gods. As we know from the scriptures themselves, Abram was himself an initiate, as the son of Terra implies, and brought with him his Cabriri gods. Otherwise, he established armament factories, always hidden underground, in some cave or convenient secluded area. Tenth, teraphim is translated as an image or god, such instruments being procurable in patriarchal days by certain wealthy men. He goes on, the patriarch was the first to declare that there was one God, the creator of the universe, and that irregular phenomena visible on land and sea, a reference it would seem to cometary and meteoric bodies so dreaded by the Chaldean or Gnostic sages. The sun, moon, and other celestial bodies were all controlled by a supernatural, all-seeing eye above. All these outstanding and characteristic places, Hebron, Ramah, Mizpah, and Shiloh, may be identified at Avebury, Wiltshire, and in its immediate neighbourhood, all being interconnected. Now, isn't that funny? Because all our lives, we've been hearing that these places were originally in the Middle East. But according to Commons Beaumont, that may not be true. The patriarch established himself firmly in Mizraim as a semi-divine personage among an alien and hostile population whom he dominated by force of arms, as did likewise his successors. He claimed to receive the injunctions and precepts of his god Cronus Saturn and became the Ram or Rama of the South, a claim to divinity playing a vital part in the history of the Mizraite lands and as Diodorus implies, was later adopted by the Egyptian kings. So this is where we find out that Moses was a high druid and knew that there were celestial upheavals happening at the time. There was volcanoes going off, there was cometary visitations, and they knew that this was happening and that it was going to destroy Egypt. How far was the man we know as Moses behind this situation? We know from the scriptures that earlier he had fled from Egypt with a price on his head, and now had returned defiantly to threaten Pharaoh. Apart from the stories in Exodus of how after each plague Moses and Aaron visited the king and demanded that he should free the so-called Israelites in avarice, there is that strange account of how Moses and Aaron cast their serpent rods defiantly before Pharaoh seated on his throne, which ate or destroyed the serpent rods of the Egyptian magicians. If we read between the lines, the implication was that he threatened Pharaoh with superior weapons until he consented to this demand. Josephus throws a yet clearer light on the subject. He describes how Moses, on his return to Egypt, after a long absence during which time he had been initiated into his new god, Jehovah, or GHVH, was met on the frontier by the chief Hebrews, who at first showed disbelief in some sweeping claims he made until he produced astonishing signs which ensured their deliverance. So this whole idea that these firearms were deified, and not only that, they were seen to be as part of the catastrophe that was happening as well. It was one and the same, almost as if the Egyptians thought that Moses had control over the weather itself. What could they have been other than some advanced form of armament? He was led before Pharaoh, from whom he demanded the release of the people he was championing, and to prove his power, gave him a similar demonstration. Pharaoh angrily called him an evil man who had formerly run away from Egypt and now returned with deceitful tricks and wonders and magical arts. In order to astonish him, his comment may have been caused by chagrin, but the story in Exodus suggests that Moses was able to prove that his magical arts were vastly superior to those of the Egyptians. Not that the Egyptians were without their own serpent rods. Is there not a suggestiveness in the account of how Amenepophis required to see the gods before he rounded up the unwanted peoples? There is a highly instructive passage of Isaiah where the prophet says, "O my people that dwellest in Zion, be not afraid of the Assyrian. He shall smite thee with a rod, and shall lift up his staff against thee after the manner of Egypt." A passage which, in veiled language, appears to denote that with these weapons, they punished the shortcomings of those they defeated and destroyed. In analyzing the past, I cannot overstress how vital and important is always this problem of weapons. Moses, as I shall attempt to prove, was behind the vast movements of this period with the intention of defeating Egypt, overthrowing her power, and annexing the country for his Scythians, or more notably, the Sakai. So commenced the 13 Years' War, and rapine between the gods and the giants described in so many a myth, which directly preceded the great catastrophe. It was a war which heralded the destruction of Atlantis, because, as is said in the book of Esdras, of the devices come into the world, added to earthquakes and uproars of the people of the earth. With the retreat of Amenepophis, as told of by Isaiah, the invaders enjoyed a halcyon time. They overran Egypt, pillaged her, demanded heavy tribute from cities, enslaved many, and were accused of savagery and horrid wickedness by Manetho. Manetho's account in his version of the circumstances which preceded the Exodus, and if testimony is acceptable, it definitely proves that Amenepophis was the pharaoh of that period when the heavens themselves were in a state of chaos by the approaching comet, as shown by the incidents of the various plagues and upset, it would seem, Moses' intentions. We are told that the pillar of cloud, fog, which had preceded them went behind. In other words, it blotted them out to the eyes of their pursuers, and to overcome their predicament, the Israelites marched over the frozen waters of the Oxella. That this was no miracle may be recognized by the common sense understanding of the text. The Lord caused the sea to go back and made the sea dry, and the waters were divided, and the waters were a wall unto them. And it came to pass that in the morning watched the Lord look unto the host of the Egyptians through the pillar of fire, and took off their chariot wheels so that it drove them heavily. And Moses stretched forth his hand over the sea, and the sea returned to its strength when the morning appeared. And the Lord overthrew the Egyptians in the midst of the sea. There remained not so much as one of them. The words italicized make it evident that the waters of this inland sea had frozen over, as further confirmed in Moses' paean of triumph after the Egyptians had been drowned in the quick thaw the morning following. And with the mast of thy nostrils the waters were gathered together, the flood stood upright as a heap, and the depths met congealed in the heart of the sea. In plain everyday language, the waters of the inland sea were frozen over, congealed, and with this situation confronting them, the fugitives took the opportunity during the heavy night fog to cross over the frozen water. It was not a long crossing, but in the morning, when the sun peeped through the fog, and the host of Pharaoh saw that they had eluded them, they chanced the crossing also, but their heavy chariots sank into the ice, and they were drowned. Now, can you imagine that? Can you imagine that you have firearms back then, but also you've timed this attack so perfectly that not only do your fire weapons do the damage that they're supposed to, but also God comes in with his smiting and destroys your enemies. That must have been a mesmerizing sight. It must have been, let's say, it must have screwed them up pretty bad, because the weapons of war, we know from the First World War and the Second World War that the traumas that these people come back with are real deep. And yet these people in ancient times, they saw this as God coming to save them. And from then on, when catastrophe saves you, that's got to leave a scar. And when someone has heavier weapons, or when someone says that there's a sign in the sky and that you need to follow them because this sign in the sky or this cataclysm that's happening is a sign that it's time to go to war, and that it's a divine declaration even. I think that's a pretty good introduction to sorcery and just what we're up against.
What you just enumerated lays a pretty good foundation for a certain thesis which explains cataclysm, and this is a thesis which deserves being looked at, and it involves accounts of sorcery actually being able to be decoded in terms of actual technology. What I can present today is a different track of thought, which I can do my best to lay out a foundation for. It is not to negate the track of thought which you just enumerated. It is simply something which the investigator needs to weigh and balance and consider in addition. So, what I'm about to present is just starting to lay the foundation of how can actual sorcery actually be a thing. And sorcery in terms of non-physical, more along the lines of the invisible realms. So this will be something to consider in addition to the physical explanations, which involve technology, firearms, things like that.
Okay.
So let's begin to lay this foundation.
I'm ready.
And that's good. That's a good stuff you got into.
Of course. It was in respect to amnesia and how we've forgotten this, but once you understand the Stockholm syndrome that this causes, when in the past not only cataclysms did they hurt humanity, but they also helped humanity, or they were seen as even saving them, as being on their side, as being divine providence. I just think that that's a really profound idea, but I'm ready. Let's go, Caleb.
The first foundation I want to lay is the idea of the emotional plague. And it's a phenomena that exists today, and it's a phenomena that existed in ancient times. I have a quote by Charles Konia. He states, "Political discussions are always mystical and morally tinged based on ideas of the good guys, us, versus the bad guys, them. In order to be rid of mystical thinking, one has to think functionally. Thinking in terms of the three layers of the biopsychic apparatus allows one to think functionally about people's political ideas and behavior, and not get lost in endless, non-productive political discussions. It is from the three layers of their biopsychic apparatus, the biological core, the destructive middle layer, and the superficial layer, or surface, that people function, and all human ideas and behaviors must be understood as expressions from them. The emotional plague's destructiveness to the American nation has been patiently organized over decades and is being orchestrated by communist leaders who, together with the help of well-meaning but naive true liberals, profess to be loyal Americans. The communists' ultimate goals is to eliminate, give away, all the freedoms that Americans have fought for and enjoyed and the spontaneous core expressions of their lives. The emotional plague is being spread through society by mass media, big tech, and global corporations, as well as far left individuals. The plague's current strategic target is America itself, and then it will spread globally to bring the social order as we know it to a standstill. The current order will be replaced and under the control of leftist ideologues, with the ultimate goal of establishing a brave new international world. The emotional plague is a scientific term that has two components, a somatic one, emotional destructiveness, and a psychic one, evil. It can appear on all levels of social organization, from individuals to groups, including political parties. People resist recognizing the existence and destructiveness of the plague, partly because the disease is present in latent form and can appear in anyone under the right circumstances. Moreover, both components must first be recognized in oneself before one can have a true understanding of the plague's destructive operation in others. A further obstacle is that, until recently, a functional understanding of human emotional life and determining social behavior, both healthy and sick, has not existed. This knowledge is made available to the public in the new science of social orgonomy. The systematic destruction of America by the emotional plague through political activism of the far left, in front of everyone's eyes, is eroding our society in every possible way, and yet few people are able to take a step back and see what is happening. Here are some of the ways. Emotionally, by eliminating feelings of heartfelt love for America. Historically, by the destruction and rewriting of America's history. Geographically, by the elimination of America's borders. Economically, by eliminating the free market and replacing it with the socialist state. Developmentally, by replacing individual freedom of thought with groupthink. Morally, by giving every kind of human thought and behavior equal value. Quote, different strokes for different folks. Psychologically, by infiltrating and controlling the Democratic Party, resulting in the destruction of the American two-party system. Socially, by destroying individual authority and replacing it with the collective authority of Big Brother. All of these symptoms of the emotional plague are the result of a single cataclysmic event, the transformation of American society from authoritarian to anti-authoritarian. How is the emotional plague recognized? by knowing that people are damned if they do something about it and damned if they don't. The emotional plague operates by generating immobilization and confusion. It is recognized by its destructive effects on human life. The plague's recognition and eradication depend on people learning a new way of thinking, functional thinking, about social matters, and not being stuck in their old moralistic thinking of right versus wrong. That's by Charles Konia.
That's a hell of a quote, man. Yeah, it made me think of this thing that's happened lately. Near where I live, they have found more evidence of where the actual Hadrian's Wall was built. So the line that's drawn across the map right now, they largely know where it went for the most part. But there's a few grey areas where they're not sure because they haven't digged it up yet, or they haven't excavated. But they found a piece today, and it's like this big celebration. It's like, oh, we found more of the Hadrian's Wall. And it's bittersweet for me. A lot of people would see this as pure heresy in these parts because Hadrian's Wall is such a big thing here and point to tourism and the meaning of it, the history for Northumbria and everything else. But yeah, it's a big celebration. And although I want to share in this celebration, and I do in a way, but also feeling not only a little bit angry and frustrated that people still care about Hadrian's Wall rather than what happened on either side of it in both Scotland and England. And they don't care about the tactics that were deployed to segregate one part, basically cutting off the head of the British Isles. This brutal act it's venerated. I was walking along the Hadrian's Wall one day, and an American came across and we started talking, and he said it was like a pilgrimage. And I understood what he meant, and he is correct, but I think there are far deeper pilgrimages than Hadrian's Wall, and also the story of Hadrian's Wall itself. If you actually knew the real story of Hadrian's Wall, according to Commons Beaumont, and also a lot of chroniclers around here that don't get any airtime other than the standard chroniclers, which are always cited, that Hadrian's Wall wasn't even Hadrian's Wall, but that'll have to be a topic of discussion perhaps maybe later on in this one. But for now, let's just keep it to this. I was pissed off because even now, Hadrian's Wall is a barrier to history. In these parts, in Newcastle, in the northeast, Hadrian's Wall is the biggest tourist site if you're a historian, if you're interested in finding out about your history. All roads point to Hadrian's Wall in this part of the country. And yeah, but as you were saying, the emotional plague, I think that's part of it. People, they deify Hadrian's Wall, even though it was something that was deployed to screw the country up and to keep it manageable, controllable. People still venerate that, prioritize that, other than finding out about who was here before the Romans were.
It sounds about as retarded as celebrating St. Patrick's Day.
Yeah, tell me about that. Why is that so retarded?
Most people just celebrate St. Patrick's Day and don't even realize what the history about it is or anything. You got some people who realize St. Patrick, that story was about the genocide of the Druids in Ireland by the Christians. I've come across, Connor McDarry's story about it. He has a whole different theory about it, which still isn't a good thing. Still nothing to celebrate. But his is a bit different. He says that it's a fake story and was designed to make it look like Ireland has been Christian ever since the time attributed to St. Patrick, which was in the 400s. But he says that in point of fact, there was no St. Patrick, and it was much, 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 much later before Ireland actually did become Christianized. More like 1000 AD, or 900s or 1000 sort of range. But, people celebrate St. Patrick's Day. They have no clue what it is. We even have people over here in the United States that don't know what July 4th is actually about. They think it's about fireworks,
Yeah,
So
exactly. Yeah, Guy Fawkes
yeah.
Night is the same thing over here. They don't realize that Guy Fawkes Night, otherwise known as Bonfire Night, is based on an ancient pagan ceremony. And you could even also attribute the ceremony to Bridget as well. She was also the goddess of the sun, and she served the same purpose. They would set fires alight, they would jump through them, they would even send their livestock through them. As strange as it seems now, it was almost as if the flames were blessing them to continue on through the winter. And it was also a chance for the community to come together and say goodbye, because they knew that at the end of that winter, some would not be returning to the next.
So these pagan festivals are calendar festivals which mark out the path of the sun in seasons. There's 8 points in the year. There's the 2 equinoxes, the 2 solstices, and then the 4 other points are the midway points, halfway between the fall equinox and the winter solstice. The path of the sun is called the zodiac. Zodiac means animal, zodiac, so animal. And each of the 12 signs is an animal. Basically, you have
Yeah.
the ram, the bull, the twins, the crab, the lion. And you can get into the fascinating history of those 12 signs. Those divided into 12 for a good reason. But this pagan calendar is divided into 8, and it's not natural. There is more significance to the 8 points, the 8 cardinal directions of a compass. It's not to say they didn't use sort of an 8-fold division of the year, but what we have now is definitely not natural. You can check out what's called the armillary sphere band and these planispheres. This is depicting the way that the zodiac is not in alignment with the North Star. So you take the North Star, which is in the Little Dipper, and it's not in the center of the zodiac. It's in the center of the celestial sphere, because our celestial sphere is oriented to our axis of rotation, but our axis of rotation is not in alignment with what it used to be. What it used to be is referred to as Albion, and we talked about Albion last time. That picture you shared of William Blake.
Yeah, William Blake's pre-cataclysm man before the
Exactly.
cataclysm. William Blake's Vitruvian man. That's the phrase I was looking for.
See, that quote I just read about the emotional plague, he talks about the 3 biopsychic layers that we're operating under today. You have the biological core, the destructive secondary layer, and the social surface, the persona. Well, that image by William Blake of Albion is not got the second 2 layers. The blanketing over of what we are at the core. So what we're going to track now is the corruption of Albion, and as a result, the solar system itself.
Well,
Uh,
I don't know if this will help, but I have a quote to start with, since that you brought up Albion from Women Would Read, and this chapter is called Albion. As travellers who have lost their way by night, gaze ever towards the east for the first rays of light and hope, so we who grope in the darkness of antiquity must direct our eyes to the land of the rising sun, whence learning and life itself first sprang. Listen, then, to the romance of the East. Darnus, king of Greece, had 50 sons, whom he married to the 50 daughters of his brother Augustus, king of Egypt. But soon these women thirsted for dominion, and conspired secretly to slay their husbands and to rule in their steads. But the youngest and the most beautiful had a tender heart, which crept from her lips in words of warning to her father and her spouse. Then they were all seized and set adrift in ships upon the sea, which after many storms bore them in safety to a large and uninhabited island. There they stayed and named it Albion, after Albina, their eldest sister. And here they maintained themselves by the chase, killing the deer and the boars, the wild bulls and large birds, which they found in forests with arrows and bolts and bowstrings and snares and pitfalls. And while filled with meat and drink, and with lustful thoughts, they lay sleeping on the ground, covered with the skins of wild beasts. Dark, brooding spirits swept towards them from the sky and encircled them with their shadowy arms, and intoxicated them with their flaming breath. By these were born huge and hideous giants, which soon bore others, till they filled the whole land with a strange and fierce crew. So yes, how did Albion become corrupted? Well, when you were talking before and talking about the way that the land was before and the way that we were orientated geographically, and I don't know if I'm saying this right, but the electromagnetism of the planet was different than it is now. So that is going to affect the balance centers in our brain between our ears, which tell us where we are on a certain place on the planet or which space we're inhabiting. That would have messed with all that, with every creature on the planet. And not only that, just going away from that for a second, it would make sense that there are still some places on the planet that still have murmurs of what the planet used to be, what electromagnetic signal the planet was giving off at one point. Certain places in Europe have names like Paul de Leon or the Line of Leon, and either have a prefix or the Leon comes after the name. But what is this Leon line? What is this idea that was brought up by Alan Delaney, that these dragon lines hold some particular channel of energy, or it's channeling some form of force or life force of the planet, of every creature on the planet, and also the planet itself? What are these Leon lines, and do these lines, these dragon lines, some people call them, are these places possibly places that were fragmented and were stretched across the planet when the great cataclysm happened? And not only that, are there places such as Paul de Leon that show signs, actual visible signs that this is the case, and show magnetic emanations in the sky to show that these places are special? For instance, I have a video of this massive green ring in the sky that looks like one of those plasma emanations I was talking about that came out of the volcanoes for that Mexican volcanologist and esoteric painter who described these emanations coming out of these volcanoes. Well, go to certain places on the planet, and like this Paul de Leon in France, caught on camera was this massive green ring, almost like the logo for The Wizard of Oz. It was just this huge, big emerald green ring, and it's a massive zero in the sky. First of all, when I saw this video, and I also thought of the name of the place, Paul de Leon. Now, are these places on the planet possibly in tune with and still have like spectral remnants of the soul of what the planet used to be before, and that's why they're so safely guarded? That's why these places are almost kept secret.
You
Alan
read my
Delaney did.
mind. This is precisely what I'm getting into right next. So I have a series of quotes here, which is talking about energies.
3 episodes now.
Yeah, these quotes come from people in the late 1800s, and they have some interesting things to say about what they were studying. This comes from Baron Karl Reichenbach, who was originally a chemist, and towards the latter half of his life actually began to investigate a new form of energy which could only be detected by certain people. So it was an energy that influences the nervous system. And he actually went to find sleepwalkers, somnambulists, and conducted some very, very good experiments with these people in order to document the different qualities of this energy, which he called Ode. He named it after Odin. He says,
I see.
Ode is itself something material. It is apparently a highly subtle form of matter, constituting possibly enough the medium through which organized living matter is controlled by mind. Ode is a force in nature hitherto unknown. It is akin to the great natural forces of light, heat, electricity, magnetism, chemical affinity, etc. Ode pervades the whole universe. Wherever there is magnetism, heat, electricity, friction, motion, chemical action, or putrefaction, Ode is actively developed or concentrated, and it may be perceived under favorable circumstances. It is a peculiarity of Ode that not everybody can perceive it. Acute odic perception is comparatively rare. Its possession is called sensitiveness or odic sensitiveness, and its possessors are styled sensitives. The marks of sensitiveness are numerous, but the main ones are natural somnambulism, that's sleepwalking, and readiness to fall asleep under mesmeric influence. When Ode is actively developed as by magnetism, it radiates out from the generator, and a high sensitive can see the rays in the dark, but not in the light. The odic rays, seen in the dark, resemble a light smoke or a misty flame. There is therefore in man a dormant power which in certain nervous disease conditions is awakened and made active.
Mm.
That is Baron Karl Reichenbach from his book Ode and Magnetism. The next quote comes from Eliphas Levi, who was one of the famous occultists from the late 1800s, early 1900s. You can throw in some of the other famous ones like Dion Fortune, Aleister Crowley, MacGregor Mathers, Arthur Edward White. These are interesting people to look into. So this is what he says. There exists an agent which is natural and divine, material and spiritual, a universal plastic mediator, a common receptacle of the vibrations of motion and the images of forms, which may be called in some way the imagination of nature. By means of this force, all nervous apparatuses secretly communicate together. Thence come sympathy and antipathy, thence dreams, thence are produced the phenomena of second sight and extranatural vision. This universal agent of nature's operations is the Ode force of the Hebrews and of Baron Reichenbach. It is the astral light of the Martinists, and we prefer the latter explanation as more explicit. The existence and possible use of this great force is the great arcanum of practical magic. It is the thaumaturgic rod and key of black magic. That comes from Eliphas Levi, Mysteries of Magic.
I've read his work on the tarot. Very, let's just say this guy had no time for the profane.
Yeah, he was a French guy.
It's a great quote.
It's nice how he talks it up until he gets to the last part of the last sentence. Oh yeah, for black magic. He just talks it up so much, and he's like, yeah, black magic. Yeah.
Well, I mean, a knife good for cutting things. It's good for preparing your food, but it's also good for tearing through flesh if you need to protect yourself. So I guess it's like, he's got to put in the other side of the coin. So I get that. I again, you're probably getting sick of me talking about him now, but this guy called Bill Gates, and his electromagnetism theory, where there's this thing that pervades throughout the whole universe, this electric thread, and it's a magnetic thread, and they intertwine and they create atoms, and it binds the whole universe together. And I couldn't help but think of the Old Force when you were quoting Eliphas Levi there.
Yeah, that is interesting.
It's just what came to mind.
There's all of these mythological connections to threads and cords and ropes and things like that. Like the Native Americans have some. I know I've ran into more than one Native American stories where they're talking about like some gods that get in a fight, and like one of them's caught up in this rope, and like a mouse comes along to chew the rope.
Mm.
You got Loki. You know, he makes stuff out of ropes and nets and whatnot, and it's interesting to pay attention to because it seems to be very widespread throughout the world.
Sometime you'll have to take me through your knowledge of Loki, because I only really started learning about Loki when I was doing my series. But I would really like to learn the ins and outs, and it sounds like you know some stuff that I don't know about it.
Maybe I'm just starting to learn as well. But
so Bill Gates, he in a lot of ways, he's an anti-mythologist. He doesn't really know any mythologies. He's a complete rational scientist. And it's really strange because he identifies this as well, how he's figured this out logically and rationally, and it comes to this interconnected force that binds us all. But what I also find, we all have different names for it, and Reich had his name for it, organism energy, and I really like that idea as well. I don't play on games anymore, but when I did, one of my favorite games, Final Fantasy VII, there was this underlying backstory where the planet is bound together in this energy. It's called the Life Force. The Shinra company is building these reactors to suck up all the energy out and use it for their machinations. But yeah, we can move on.
There's so much I could say to that. It's very tempting to, but I'm going to press on.
Go for it.
All right. So the next two quotes come from